What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatmas, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Pilar Orti, and we explore different media for facilitation and what it takes to facilitate audio-only conversations and what theater and podcasting has to do with all of that. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, just scroll down, check the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy. Pilar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here. Hello, listeners.
Yes, me too. And I'm curious to see what will emerge from this conversation.
Yes. You're in charge, which I'm glad for.
Well, let's see. In our exploration call, you shared the idea that you had of using podcasting as a facilitation tool. And I'm curious to hear more about that and how you came to this idea. But before we get there, let me ask you, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
So I'm glad you prompted me with the question. And of course, you've asked, you ask other guests. So I'm glad that I had a heads up on that. So I can't remember exactly when, but I can remember the type of work I was doing. So I came into the whole, I'm going to call it corporate training business from theater. So I used to teach also theater. And what I started to do was use ensemble building exercises, so very simple games that I would use to get people together to create theater. I started to use that for team away days. So stuff where we do the game more like a metaphor, and then the value was in the conversation after we'd played the game. And at some point, I must have heard someone say facilitator somewhere, or I might have read it. And I thought, that's it. Because I'm not training when I'm doing this. What I'm doing is I'm creating the space and I'm allowing people to have a conversation. Maybe we weren't going towards anything, so maybe there was not an objective, but I still thought of that as someone who's enabling people to do something together. So sometime quite early on, and then I did move to learning facilitator because I thought that was more what I was doing. And then, of course, you have to be so careful with the word facilitator because sometimes people say, oh, we need a facilitator, and they mean a trainer. So yeah, so around then.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing this journey. And what did you learn from theater, or what is it about using theater to create the space for collaboration?
So very specifically, the kind of theater I liked to create and what I used to create was, in fact, very collaborative theater. So very ensemble based. And what I mean by that is a lot of the scripted shows and the more traditional stuff, you tend to think of a few leads. So a few people who really carry the show, who maybe if the script, they have lots of lines. What I liked to create was shows where everyone was just as important, where all the characters, where all the actors really were needed for someone to feel the whole experience. So the process was collaborative. The rehearsal process was very playful. And the way of getting into the way of working, the way of getting ready was through exercises, through physical exercises, because I really like physical theater. And some of these exercises, as a performer, they train you to listen to each other, but not just with your ears, also with your eyes, with your body. You start to listen to the group, also not just yourself. So a lot of these exercises have been adopted as warm-ups in normal workshops, but they're a warm-up for a very specific reason. And so what I saw was that one, if you did these exercises with teams, when we're looking at team away, or even when you're training, we're doing content-led training, immediately it gets people in a different headspace because they're using, especially we're working with knowledge workers, we get them to connect in the space or physically. They make sounds and they say things that they don't usually hear each other say. And then it creates that safe space for people to say, oh, I wasn't listening there. Or, I felt like we didn't trust what we were doing, so I had to change what we were doing. And it's easy to have that conversation when you're referring to a very simple exercise, which might involve clapping, than when we're talking about some really important project that we've done. And I just thought there's something there that just creates this playful space, but that actually can have, where you can have very serious conversations then.
So what I hear is that you're basically putting the focus from themselves and the team to something more abstract, a metaphor, and thereby ease the conversation and make the issues that might be there appear, but in a different framework.
Exactly. You're putting it all outside of themselves. And like you said, even outside of the team, because this is not what we usually do. Therefore, it is less important. But like you said, you can have those conversations around stuff that's probably there.
And the example you just gave, this, I wasn't listening, or it didn't fit, so I changed it on the fly. I can imagine that these are behaviors that these people would also show when it comes to a team meeting. I wasn't listening, or we agreed on something, but I just decided to change it.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of, I didn't, and even if you mentioned a meeting, which is quite a good example, just taking the fact that people think differently, and so their contributions through meetings is different. So if you think of, sometimes it takes ages to come to a decision because you want to hear everyone's points of view, blah, blah, blah. And how someone can just cut through all of that because they're too impatient, or because they've got the bit of information they need, whatever. So yes, exactly what you're saying. And also it's not trusting the process, and also naming the fact that you were not trusting that process, and realizing, and it might be the first time that you've had that recognition. Also the caveat that it could be that you or the team behaves in that way because it's a new context. It could be that you're not behaving in that way when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. But at least then that's also an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. What triggers you and what triggers certain behaviors?
Exactly.
So how would you then debrief such an exercise? Would you rather invite the participants to reflect and see themselves in these situations, or would you make it kind of an open circle sharing?
So circle sharing, definitely. I love circles. And this is super interesting because when you work with people who are not used to working in this way, and who haven't really been asked for their opinion for a while, the opening question is, of course, how was that? Which is a really crap question. But, some people will go, oh, blah, blah. And then you say, okay, so what happened? Or what helped your enjoyment of the game? Or when did the game work best? And then, of course, you always have, there was good communication. Okay, what do you mean by that?
What does it mean?
What is good communication? Or the typical, it was great teamwork. Okay, what does that mean? So it's really, one is it being an opener also for people to start to really think about how they're working, for being specific about what's working, to start to name what's working. And then it really depends. It's sometimes the group themselves would go, and I can see that when tak. Sometimes I might leave it, which for some people is very frustrating because then they're, why are we doing this? But sometimes I think, you know what, let's just leave that and see whether later, when we might be looking at some kind of more process and product-led or output-led process, we can refer back to. So remember when we were doing that could be that. But of course, then there's always the question, all right, so how could you see, is this something that you could relate to how you operate when you're working on your tasks? I think that's the main question to bring them back is does this reflect, or is this what you see, or is this how you feel about your work with the team? And let them decide whether this is a real reflection of their operating as a team.
Yeah. And even if it doesn't, to reflect on the meta level, what was different in this game and what can we learn from it in order to maybe improve teamwork? If this was such a great teamwork and good communication, what was different as opposed to the teamwork they usually do?
And also the individual piece, because the first step in debriefing the exercise is about how you showed up and work for you as an individual and how you're reacting. And I think it's so important to go back to that. And very often people at work and me, we don't reflect enough on what we need and how we are feeling. And that affects so much how we show up when we're working with others.
Our energy, the effect on the room, yes, it's massive. In your company is called Virtual Not Distant.
Yes.
So how did you then go from this truly embodied start in your facilitation journey to a company who apparently focuses on virtual collaboration, which you started 5 years ago, I think, so ways before the pandemic, where everyone understood that actually virtual must not be distant. But how did you make this move, this jump, and what is your experience now in the virtual world? How can you replace this embodiment or translate it?
So much stuff. So I'll start with a simple one, which is how I got to now. So I started playing with the whole theater thing, and I was still running a small theater company. And then I saw, okay, this is interesting. Let's move on. So let's see where I can go with the theater-based stuff. And I started to look at management and leadership training. So as well as the team away days, I thought, okay, I'm now really interested in all this other stuff. How can my style incorporate a little bit more theory, a little something else that you would expect in a leadership development course? So that was in my head. And then what happened is I met my husband in Amsterdam.
Yay!
And then my father got, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Ooh, not yay. So it meant that suddenly I found myself traveling a lot between London, Amsterdam, and Madrid. And this was when I was starting what the other company was just called Unusual Connections. And I thought, this cannot rely on me being in places. It's never gonna take off. And in fact, it didn't. I did some work, but it never became something that looked viable. And so I started to look online. And by that time, there were places like People Per Hour were already there, or Upwork. And I found a job, very badly paid, of course, moderating a forum online for a small company. I think it was a social enterprise who was delivering online management and leadership qualifications. I thought, I can moderate a forum. That sounds great. I can do it anytime. I can do it from wherever. The internet was already quite good, not what it is like now. And once there, I was having lots of fun. And the woman running it said, oh, we've also got webinars. Do you want to run some webinars? And I said, oh, I've never done it, but yeah, why not?
Sure.
And my first webinar experience, which was, I'm a very classic webinar person. I just talk and get people to talk in the chat, and that's great. And then that was all you could do. So I didn't even have my camera on, and that was not expected. Bandwidth was probably not great anyway. And I ran my first session, which was an hour on, I don't know, take your pick, getting feedback, whatever. And there were quite a lot of people on the call. So there was quite a lot of stuff coming in from the chat. And after the hour, I was sweating. I was also standing. As you can see, I need to stand when I do stuff. And I thought, oh my God, I just feel like I've been in a room full of people. I couldn't see them. They couldn't see me. It didn't matter. And I thought, I engage with this medium. Let's see what else we can do here. And in looking at that, of course, I then started to pay more attention to everything about stuff happening online. I started to look at what was happening with virtual teams, as in international teams. I saw, and then I don't even know how I got there, but I actually started to work for what's now Management 3.0, which was a distributed team, distributed organization. I did that for a year. And that already was when Zoom was already in, and Zoom had breakout rooms. And I thought, okay, this can now be a workshop setting. However, I didn't go into delivering training online. What I thought is what people need is help to work online. So they probably need something more like a blend of consultancy, training, facilitation. What is it they need? So basically, I just saw that that's where we were going. And that's why I decided, okay, well, probably I'll do stuff with people in person because, that's how it'll be. And we'll do something online. Any questions about that before I go into the embodied experience?
No, I'm listening.
And then it's very difficult because, as I say, I connect with this 2D world in a way that is not 2D in my mind. So it's very strange, but I go into it. I was having a conversation yesterday in a Twitter space. So now you can open an audio only room on Twitter and people just come in. So I was running one, and someone I've met online, Chris Coladonato, and I were talking, and she was saying, yeah, when I go to my social enterprise in the morning, which is like a Facebook for the company, I read through and it's like I'm going through this hallway. It's like I'm going through a corridor, hearing all these conversations. And I said, I'm the same. I can look at conversations and feel them and hear them and feel like I'm surrounded by people, which is not the experience for everyone. So for me, it just works. it still works. What I try to do is to be as 3D as possible and ironically as low tech as possible when I am with people. So you can see I've got behind me, listeners, I'll describe it to you. Miriam can see it. It's a canvas thing, which is a screen, which is not perfect. You can see the top of the screen. And when I'm doing meetings or presentations or workshops, this is what I have. And it looks tidier than now because I'm in my lounge. But I try not to use anything behind me that's fancy. I try to keep everything as rough as possible because for me, that means that people see that I am in a physical space. I'm not in some avatar online space, which everything is flashy. So I try and have stuff. So listeners, I'm showing Miriam just the Post-it notes and a pen. I try and have stuff I can show. So I try to just not pretend that I am not in a physical space.
And you don't distract the focus from yourself and the analog props or tools you might use to show to the camera, but it's not about the virtual background, the brand. It's just about you and the content.
Yeah.
And you caught my attention when you shared about the Twitter space, which might lead us also a little bit in the direction of the podcasting. So I see already the big arc. I'll guide us there. As it sounds, it's a lot with voice only and words only, so not necessarily camera. So also when you speak about low tech, so whether the camera is on or not, like your first webinar experience, you didn't even realize that there was no camera. What is it about the way of facilitation and maybe as a facilitator being in your body? And you said you're standing in everything you do. What is it that you have to do when you're facilitating a only audio conversation?
So when I've done audio only, it's mainly been things like panels and stuff like that. And for me, what it does, it really allows me to concentrate a lot more because it's interesting because a lot of people like video because you can read more, like you can read facial expressions and stuff. However, if I'm running a workshop and I can see everyone's faces, I'm trying to interpret them. And I'm trying to interpret usually 20 faces of people I don't know. So my mind is just constantly, I can't shut it up because it's really just trying to understand everything that's going on around me. Whereas with audio only, I can center myself a lot more and then I can ask a lot more and there's less to interpret. Of course, there might be less information coming my way and you have to interpret silence, but that's a different matter. But I think there's something for me about that I am so, if I have people in front of me, I'm just trying to get as much from them and as much information about what's going on. I think it might be sometimes it's insecurity as well, like going, oh, I think, how is this landing? And did I say that right? It's that. Whereas with audio, I'm not that worried.
It's interesting what you're saying. And I would +1 the insecurity. And I think it's an instinct that we try to align what we hear from the body language and the facial expressions we get. And I think our brains are programmed in a way that we immediately spot whether there's inauthenticity. Mm-hmm. So if the words don't align with the body language or facial expression, our brain tells us, danger, danger, you might die. Yeah. So yes, when we only focus on the words, we only have the information that is voluntarily given to us, being it silence or expressions. And I have personally experienced with being on Clubhouse a little bit more. We have a monthly conversation there, that I really struggle from not getting the visual feedback. So I start saying something and then I don't know, okay, does it actually make sense to the audience? Can they follow me?
Yeah.
And I realized that I would more often than in a video conference interrupt myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's and what you're showing as well is that it's such a personal thing and a preference. So apart from everything I said, I don't watch any YouTube videos. I don't watch any documentaries. I don't watch any talk shows on the television. But I listen to lots of podcasts about thousands of things. I have podcasts all the time that I'm doing something with when I can listen to them. And I am a voiceover artist. Mm. So that is my medium. This is where I know how to modulate myself. So there's also something around that. And the other thing is just coming back as well to how I used to approach acting and theater. When I used to either direct or teach, when something wasn't working with a scene, I would shut my eyes and just listen to the actors. Mm. And then going back to your point about authenticity, and then I could hear. So if I could see the full actor and they were talking or whatever, because of their gestures and that, my brain would say, oh yeah, they mean it. Yeah, it's real. Mm. But if I closed my eyes and I didn't have any of those cues and just heard the voice, then I would go, actually, you don't mean anything you're saying. So it's also with the voice, I can hear probably a lot more or as much as if I have the physical. You still have to interpret, of course, but I think the voice is really authentic and you can hear a lot as well, if you are inclined in that way.
Interesting. I did an interview with Joop, who's a voice coach, and he said something similar, that you can hear a lot. As much as you can read body language, you can also read the voice, and hearing insecurities and difficulties. Yeah, thank you for bringing this back to my mind. But how do you interpret silence then? How do you know whether it's a thinking break or a I don't agree break or I feel awkward silence?
In a way, the same as you would on a video call. Although, of course, in the video, you can see if people are frowning, so you might interpret. Again, we're still interpreting. And I think with silence, and the thing is with audio, you have license to ask even more. And you can say, right, I can't see anyone, so I don't know whether the silence means that we don't have anything else to say, or whether the silence means you're thinking, or whether the silence says you're thinking about how to express it. And I think doing that then allows for someone to say, well, actually. And the other thing that I think can be quite fun as well is when there is silence or whether you can't hear what's coming back, is just to ask people to share what their faces are doing. Or if you were an emoji, what emoji would you be right now? And also you can role model a lot. Like when someone is talking, you can say, okay, yeah, well, I'm nodding. You can't see me, but I'm nodding. And that as well is anything that you can integrate so that people, again, it's the same as what we were talking about, the theater language. Give them something that's slightly different to how they usually operate that they can hang on to. So we're not used to saying I'm nodding, but you could say that, you could encourage that. So if you don't have anything to add, but just give us a clue of what you're thinking, of how you're thinking more than what.
What I love about that is the permission to be explicit. You have to be even more explicit. And I think in the going from offline to online already asked for more explicitity, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And then taking away the video goes even one step further.
Yes. And you completely brought the link I was going to make as well, which is that is the main thing about when we move to work online, is that there's a lot of things that we have to be explicit about, and we have to put in processes to communicate that we might not have needed before. And this is where the struggle is. This is really a struggle, because for some people, it feels like we're dehumanizing our interactions and that teamwork is becoming rigid. But actually, it just falls apart, at least for now. And because we don't have those processes to either regularly check in how we are or whatever, or what we're working on or what we're thinking or what we're learning, then everything defaults to how we know to communicate that stuff, which is in meetings. Yeah. And that's where all the whole too many meetings have come. And it's really because if you're not used to it, it can feel very strict. All this being so explicit about everything I'm thinking.
And on the other hand, it's a fantastic opportunity to finally align on what we actually mean to say.
Yes.
On being upfront with the conversations we need to have, the informations we need in order to do our work. And everything that was always kind of dealt with around the water cooler now has to come to the surface. So it's an opportunity. And again, I think with limitations, we create space where creativity and collaboration can happen. But we do need to create the space at the first place. And I think that's what is often forgotten in the office life.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to ask one further question. Also to link this explicit way of facilitation and audio only, maybe just for you to share your experience from the Twitter space. How do you facilitate that?
Well, there weren't many of us, so it was really easy in the three that we've done.
Don't make it small.
However, it does need. So what it's got is you have 10 people can have their microphones open at the same time. So, and you can control, I think you can mute people just like you could on a call. So you have to, funnily enough, you have to observe when people's microphones are switching themselves on. And that's interesting because thinking about it now, when you are in an online workshop where, and honestly, people don't have to be muted all the time. I once at the end, I don't know if you found this, but at the end of a call with about 20 people, I said at the end, okay, let's everyone open the mic. And you couldn't hear anything because Zoom's done such a great job of removing background noise. So anyway, people tend to be muted so they don't have to worry about it. And what you tend to have to see when you have cameras on is that people will either raise their hand or ask for permission using the camera before they unmute themselves. But on something like Twitter Space, and I imagine Clubhouse will be the same, they unmute themselves when they want to speak. So that's a really good indication. And other than that, it's the same for me. There's not much difference. Is you hear what someone has to say, and when they're more or less finished, then you invite the next person, or you hear that someone is trying to say something, but someone else has got in there faster. So for me, it's the same. It's not much different. Only the thing is you don't have the chat. So you can't have people saying, can I say something? Which is a blessing and a curse, but because it's a blessing. So there's no side conversations, which as a participant, I don't like when there's stuff going on in the chat and I'm trying to look at the chat, but too much, two channels, but you do miss it sometimes. So, and I think as well, to be more explicit of where you are, I mean, the Twitter space, I'm leading the conversation. So it's not facilitation as such. So I need to be very explicit of where I think the conversation should go next so that people can come because I can't see anything. But always with that checking in of this is where I'm going. However, before I go there, does anyone want to add anything? But it's interesting now that you're saying it because you start to lead the conversation a lot more because of those restrictions, which is fine. It's a different space.
How would you interrupt or would you interrupt people? Because with video, we can just from the way how close or distant we move into the camera or with visual clues, we can give people at least the idea that it's maybe time for them to come to an end?
Well, I mean, going back to your thing about being explicit, I can't see that you can do it in any other way but saying, sorry to interrupt, but either sorry to interrupt, but I think but there's quite a few people here, and I see some people also want to contribute. Can you just wrap up? Or sorry to interrupt, but someone else is trying to say something, or sorry to interrupt, but so sorry to interrupt, but is probably a good strategy, as good a strategy as any. I'm sure there are better ones. Listeners, you can send them through to Miriam.
And maybe one of the rare occasions where a theater player says yes, but instead of yes, and.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. I find this
right.
very interesting.
Greetings, listeners. Dancing with Markers has launched a new online self-paced course on visuals designed with facilitators in mind. Stop making boring, meaningless slide decks and start bringing visuals into your meetings in a fun, purposeful, and creative way that will have a real impact on improving the outcomes of your meeting. Visuals are central to facilitating engaging meetings, but so many facilitators and trainers lack a strong design muscle to create fun and purposeful flip charts, slides, and visual templates. For the facilitator who wants to incorporate better visuals into your meetings, this course is designed to transform you into a confident visual facilitator. Find the link to purchase in the show notes with a special 10% off coupon just for Workshops Work listeners. Now, back to the show.
And maybe just asking for the permission at the beginning to say, okay, I might interrupt you depending on the amount of people in the room and whether you're going deviating from the direction that we defined as our conversation.
But also the expectation. I mean, a Twitter space, for a start, only 10 people can have their microphone open at the same time. And when people come on, it says listener until you give them the microphone, and then it says speaker. So there is that expectation anyway. But you're right that actually, whatever that, not everyone might have the same expectations. So it's very important to do that. Just like you would say to people, well, sorry, I might mute you, leave your microphones open, but then I might mute you if there's just lots of noise coming. So apologies for that in advance. You're right.
Big bag of apologies in advance, and then everything.
And then we can do anything. Yes. Facilitation by apology.
But good food for thought. And talking about new ways of facilitation, we're talking about audio, and I mentioned in the beginning that in our exploration call you mentioned one idea that you're carrying around is using podcasting as a facilitation tool. And instead of sharing what I understand and remember from this inspiring conversation, maybe you can just give us an idea of the concept.
Yes. So I love how you put that, this idea that you're carrying around, because indeed that's what it is. So just to give a little bit of context of, so where the ideas come from. So before pandemic, actually, I was looking for how else can I help teams, distributed teams, remote teams to work better together, etc. And one of the things I thought was actually you could have maybe even a team of 20 people, whether they are a full organization or just a team within. And one of the things that they could be doing to stay up to date with each other, they could be having their own little podcast in their team. So this would be, for example, I host one episode and then 2 weeks later, someone else hosts an episode, or however you want to do. So I was thinking about, okay, so how would this work? Blah, blah. And then, of course, in my mind, I was thinking, well, to be completely realistic, the chances of something like this ever taking off are very small because of the time limit in anything. And this was even before Corona. So, and I thought, however, even having the conversation of, if we were to have a podcast, by which I mean a regular audio with a regular schedule, what would we want to hear from each other? Because that would be how you would approach the podcast. Okay, what conversations are we missing? Or what are we missing about hearing from each other? Given the fact that remote teams, traditionally, or distributed teams, don't have many meetings and have flexible schedules. And sometimes their time zones apart. So some people work at very different times. So what are we missing? And then I thought, well, actually, even if I came to a team and had that, it's the same as the theater exercise idea. And we went through the process, although this one's more aligned. We went through the process of, okay, what are we missing from each other? What do we want to hear? What stuff that's not work related? Who would edit? Or, things like that. You start to have conversations that maybe you haven't had or that you're not likely to have in your day to day. So I thought that it could open up. People could talk about their skills or preferences or ideas that have nothing to do with their day to day, and that can be valuable for the other teams to know. Either from a purely personal point of view, I know you better, or from I didn't know you could do that. If you did this with this, we could do this better. So again, it's providing a different container for conversations that could be useful. And it could be that at the end of the process of what would be in this podcast, how regular, blah, blah, they say, we don't really want to do this because we're not really paid to be editing audio or whatever. However, why don't we set up a document, and every 2 weeks we write down a few lines about what we learned that week. That is, for example, if the team had identified that they would love to hear what people are learning. Well, what can we do that's not as time consuming, where we don't have to learn a new skill? So it can lead to, by going through the process of, let's do this thing that probably we know we're not going to do. But okay, so what little thing could we do that would be almost as useful?
Yeah. And I love the idea on so many levels, not only because I love podcasting, obviously. And I know the potential this medium has just from having a conversation with microphones and an open script, let's say like that, or at least a topic. What I also hear, and you mentioned it, is the similarity to the exercise with the theater you mentioned in the beginning, that if we're talking about setting up a podcast show, this gives us permission to brainstorm about, okay, what could be podcast episodes? So we don't have to talk about ourselves immediately in our own wishes, but imagine we would have a show on our team. What would be the topics that we have to cover? Yeah. And then everyone can voice their needs by covering them by, that's general knowledge that is needed. It's not me.
And there's also the piece of, you could also look at it from a point of view of a team in an organization. You could also turn it around and say, okay, if we were to do a podcast to share with the rest of the organization, what tone would it have? What would we want people to know? Blah, blah, blah. And that can actually also unearth lots of stuff about the visibility of individuals and the team in the organization. And that can lead to something that's more actionable.
Team culture, yeah.
Yeah. So it's both of those. Yeah.
And still I think it's, to be very honest, a little bit disappointing that you would say, and if it doesn't work, they can have a document. No, no. Because I think, okay, if they don't have the skills, what does it mean for the team to together face the challenge of taking on something creative, literally creative, because they're creating something? And what are the minimum required skills that you need? What if you didn't edit the podcast, but let it blank? So what would it also say about, I think, even with these conversations, you reveal so much about the team culture and the individuals. There will surely be those saying, no, we need to be totally authentic and transparent and we don't edit anything. Yeah. And the other one, no, we need to make it an entire show with a visual and a video around it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right that if someone goes through this process, and at the end of the day, let's face it, most people can record the audio on their phone and put it up on Slack, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's really also, but I think that's a very good point. I'm just thinking of the we don't have time for this thing. But also then that could be another conversation of, really?
How important is it
Exactly.
to have these conversations?
Exactly.
And also I think the audio, if it's a 10 to 20 minutes conversation that you would have every week to share it with the team, you actually take away or you free up time that usually they would either spend searching the internet for the information, writing emails, sitting in meetings, and now they can actually listen to it while having breakfast or while going for a walk.
Yeah.
And they don't have to read it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I actually wonder how important it would be. So how important it is to actually release it or to just do it. And maybe this applies to many of the workshop exercises we do. So bringing this conversation about using podcasting as a facilitation tool or exercise on a meta level. How important is it that the teams actually bring forth the outcomes of a workshop? Or how important is just the process and the insights it reveals?
Well, again, it would depend. I mean, I think it's really important also to know, are you going in? So as someone bringing this concept, am I going in really with, does this team really want to be thinking of doing this? Or is it an exercise?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important. It could be that the team thinks that they're going to do this and then it's not done, and that's fine. You can still learn a lot from that. Then you adjust and you go, okay, well, at some point this is not going to happen. So what did we learn? But you can also use it just as an exercise. Now, be careful with just as an exercise because I was playing with this idea. And so I went to a IAF England Wales meetup and I workshopped the idea. And at the end of the thing, of course, what happened? They went, oh, why don't we have a podcast? And so that's how facilitation stories started. So that's also interesting. It could be the other way around. It could be that it's brought in just as a facilitation tool, pretty much like I used to use theater exercises as a facilitation tool. And we knew that was what it was. And at the end, maybe they could go, well, actually, this could be really great. Let's do it. And then if that happens, then the magic is that then it's the team that's decided rather than the manager who thought, because this is how usually these things go, rather than someone having been brought in. Actually, that's an even stronger thing. If at the end of going through the process, the team went, we really need this.
Mm. Yeah, or they get excited about what they created.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I wonder to what extent we can actually use this reverse thinking for more exercise, that we would come in, okay, we need to co-create the company culture instead of saying, okay, this is the goal. Or no, we're just doing this exercise to create culture en masse.
Mm-hmm.
And then leaving it to the team whether they see potential to use this for a broader purpose or not.
Yeah. I can't come up with another example, but yes, I suppose it's being put in a situation where your mind has to go to seeing the solution, which is not always great. Or your mind has to go through what would it feel like, or what would it be like to?
Mm.
What would it be like to? So I think there's a lot of that anyway that happens sometimes when we're looking into the future, but maybe sometimes we're going too far into the future. And also a lot of the time when we are thinking about things we're going to do, there's very little that can be done the next day that would make a difference. And there's also, if you think about something like a podcast, there is a novelty factor, which is, So again, it's what, can we bring?
And also then how high are the stakes if it starts with a huge kind of enthusiasm and then dies out? And I think I once read that most of the podcasts die after episode either 7 or 25.
Or 3. At the moment, it's 3.
Because in the beginning, it's exciting and you learn so many new skills and you get out of your comfort zone to approach potential guests or to have your solo show. And then you just see the workload.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is your favorite exercise?
I don't have many now. My favorite exercise, so I'll give you two answers. One is very quick. One is the classic, the one that liberating structures called the 1, 2, 4, all. Mm. Especially when you do it online, it blows people's minds. I think online, it blows people's minds more than not online, yes. Not in person.
Agree.
Yeah, because it's really special, and you really feel the change in dynamic from the pair to the four and then to the whole group. So I think for online, that is, and also, yeah, that's my favorite one online. But the one I loved to do when I was facilitating and using the theater stuff, there's one, it's stop, clap, jump, go. Mm. Where you have those 4 commands, and you ask people to follow your command. So stop, you stop, jump, you jump once, clap, you clap once, and go, you go, you walk around. So it's a walk around the room thing. And of course you need to adapt it if not everyone can walk around the room. And then at some point you switch the commands. So stop becomes go and clap becomes jump. And I love it. It's hilarious. It's a lot of fun, and it's all about change. Mm. And it's all about more than change. It's all about how you approach change. And something that I wanted to say earlier that I didn't get to because I went somewhere else was that when you ask people, how was that for you? And how did that feel? I've had so many times someone saying, it felt like blah, blah, blah. Is that the answer you were looking for? And it's true, because we come from a place where, and this is going to sound some bad for some trainers, but I don't do quiz questions. So if I ask a group or if I ask a person for their thoughts or whatever, I don't ask for an answer that I already know. Mm. So that's something I don't like. But in traditional training, that's what happens, is the trainer will ask a question to which they already know the answer. It's just that, of course, they're asking you so that you get thinking before they tell you, which is fine, but it's not my style. And so when I ask, how was that? Or what did that say? Blah, blah, blah. Everyone always thinks that there's a set way of doing this and there's things you need to say. So any exercise, going back to what's my favorite exercise, any exercise where someone is going to say something that I hadn't thought of, or someone is going to interpret something in a way that I hadn't heard being interpreted, that's my favorite exercise.
I like that, and I thank you for sharing your reflections around it. I agree with this preset answer, and I think we talked earlier about the fact how to create this safe space, how to get the participants out of their minds, out of their heads.
Yeah, out of their minds too.
Out of their heads, and feel comfortable in the communication with each other. I think if you then put the pressure on them to come up with the right answer, and then there are some trainers who would then call out more and more people, and everyone gives it a try, and nobody knows this. It's easy to read that kind of silence that emerges in a room, right? This frustration, like, come on.
Yeah.
So, I hear that it's important also to leave this creative space and also to be willing to listen and to learn from the participants. And I can imagine that you can do this clap, stop, jump, go online.
Yeah, I did it once. Yeah, I have done it. It does work. It's very similar. You just need 2 sets of instructions that go well together. It could be a type thing, or it could be clap you can do. So yeah, and you can do all kinds of it. You can adapt it basically. Yeah.
And even I think what we seldomly do is to ask participants to just stand up. I mean, you already stand, but I had this recently. We had such a tough schedule that we simply didn't have time to take a real break. So I said, okay, and it was a 2.5 hour thing. Mm-hmm. So, okay, so now get off your chair, stand up, and let's stretch and tap yourself on the shoulder because you did a good job. And in the beginning, they looked at me as they were like, is she making fun of us? Does she really mean that? But then once they got off the chair, totally changed the dynamic and the energy in the room, the virtual room. So yeah. In your experience, what makes a workshop fail?
No preparation. No preparation at all levels, I think. There's been, I mean, obviously from the facilitator point of view as well, but also from the group or team point of view as well. It might not fail, but it can't be as good as it could be. I still find people turning up not knowing why they're there. Or I used to find this so often before with the theatre thing, they hadn't been briefed because I don't know if anyone is still doing this kind of stuff, which I'm sure they are. It'd be great to hear from them. And of course, after Corona, but there was always this thing that the manager or team leader would bring me in, but they wouldn't tell the team the methodology because they were scared no one would turn up. So you can imagine. I mean, luckily I'm really goofy. And so people tend to feel safe with me from the beginning. And actually, I really ease people in anyway. But I think that is a risk because you're bringing people in. They know they're coming to something, but they don't have any investment in it. They don't know why they're there or they don't want to be there. So I think that is still, I mean, most of my work has been in training, that there is still that people will arrive to a workshop not really knowing. Yeah, I think that would be my main thing.
So what I hear is that it's more the mental preparation than really reading documents or this kind of preparation.
Yeah, but actually, especially where any preparation that's needed. So it could be that something that if people need to prepare in some way, but they don't, or the facilitator or the trainer also needs to prepare in a way that they haven't, the more practical stuff, then there's also that. But also just the mental of what am I here to do?
What do I expect from the workshop? What is my own, why do I invest this time and attention? Yeah. And also what you mentioned about the manager not telling their team that you would come in to do the theater things. It's sad on two levels. At least I can see two levels. One is apparently this manager doesn't trust their team, that they will be okay with it. Because if he or she decided that this is a good way to go, why wouldn't the team trust that? And the second is it's a total ignorance of different personality types. And not everyone is the type of, oh yeah, there's something different. Let's try that.
Yeah.
Or, okay, I'm joining without knowing the agenda. There are a lot of participants or individuals actually who just feel more comfortable knowing the direction and knowing the process, or at least having some idea about it.
At the same time, with this specific thing, and this is the reason, one of the reasons that I stopped using the methodology is that, especially in the UK, there was a lot of preconception of what theatre or acting is. So if I say, and there still is, if I say I'm using, at the end of that project, I was talking about ensemble-led exercises. I wasn't even using theatre or drama because people think that people think that all actors do when they train is stand up and speak in front of people. There's a whole journey until you are comfortable doing that, which is all about small stuff that you need to do. And the training is through games and stuff like that. So I can imagine if I said to a group, there's this person, and they probably go, well, freeze. And also remember that drama is part of the curriculum. So some people will have had bad experiences also. So there's all of that. Now, having said that, it is that mistrust. And also maybe it's some mistrust in themselves also to think, oh, am I making a mistake? I'd better not tell them if no one turns up. But I think, like you say, I think if you do the right brief, I never did a training for anyone that hadn't met me beforehand. And the reason why they would then bring me in was because they saw, okay, people are going to be safe with her. You can also say that to the team. You can say, don't let the idea, whatever you have in your heads, put you off. This is a normal person that's coming to work with you. So, and she knows we're not doing drama training. We're actually having a team away day. So
we're having the drama in our daily interaction. Yes. So we don't need a workshop for that.
Yes, exactly.
Nice. Is there anything that you would like to share that we haven't touched upon in our almost 1 hour conversation already?
I love talking. Very briefly, I do want to share with listeners, because I think I did tell you about it, that the whole podcasting and audio as a medium to keep people connected, I'm really interested in. And the role of facilitation in getting that a little bit more into organizations, really interesting. So what I'm exploring now, which is another idea I've been carrying with me, is in organizations using podcasting as an in-house, as an internal communication method. But what's really interesting about that is, again, not what the podcast is in the end, but actually finding the group of people who want to make this happen within the organization. And finding the group of people who have stuff to say, again, who want to be involved, and finding what the organization wants to pull out and then share within their people. So this is really internal. And I find that really interesting, the role of facilitation within that. So because it's really about helping people make this something that is theirs, but it will be directly theirs from a small group, but it's got to feel like the whole organization owns it.
Yeah.
So I am seeing, okay, what is the role of the enabler in that? How much hands-on? I find it interesting.
Yes, and I could perfectly see it as the core team coming from communication, of course, but also from HR, because there's so many air quotes soft skills that you also have to train with it. It's how to ask questions, how to listen in guiding, how to select these people, how to get the shy ones, because those who like to share, those you hear a lot in an organization, but how do you actually get those who have so many ideas but rather keep quiet?
Yeah, and in order to make this really useful as in we're going back to the question of what's missing. What would this podcast do? What's missing? So it will be the voices we rarely hear, or the work we rarely see, or the thoughts that are rarely shared. And so finding that, again, is another really interesting exercise, because in doing that as well, you might uncover other stuff. And you might come up with other solutions. So it's, again, I'm thinking that as a product, this internal podcast, it's great. And also what I'm really trying to do is to not have the top-down approach as well. We really don't want to hear from the senior leaders we hear all the time. We've got those. So that's one. But also, how do we make it something so that we really make it a way of people to be visible and feel connected to their people that they don't see every day. So that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you. Thank you for re-emphasizing that. So, dear audience, if this is something for you, you'll find all the information about Pilar in the show notes. Reach out. And then we'll call it the hidden gems.
The hidden gems. Nice.
If someone in the audience, for a reason we don't know, fell asleep after minute 2 of our conversation, just woke up and said, I don't have time to listen to the entire show again, what would you like them to walk away with?
I heard you ask this to someone else. I was like, that's really
I always ask it. It's the moment where I realize whoever has listened to the podcast until the end, and I realize that most don't. Because everyone is surprised.
Well, I would actually say something that maybe we haven't said, but I'm just thinking about new ways of working with groups, new ways of working with teams, new ways of approaching, is letting new contexts help you discover new ways of doing things. So, yeah, that's all I'd say.
Wonderful. Could be a nice title to the conversation.
Nice.
Thank you so, so much for your time, for your energy, for sharing your experience, for exploring all these different media and creativity.
Well, thank you for giving me the space.
And I will put all the information how to connect to you in the show notes.
Great.
And we keep in touch.
Great.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, Please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.